Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So begins one of the great stories of the Bible, and if you ever saw Charlton Heston's 10 Commandments or Disney's Prince of Egypt, you know what's coming. There will be plagues and miracles. I had to memorize the plagues in high school, so let's see. Blood, frogs, lice, flies, death of cattle, boils, hail and fire, darkness, death of firstborn. I confess I am showing off. There will also be feasts of manna and tablets of stone and golden calves and bronze serpents and commandments and obedience and disobedience. This story of the Exodus is one of the most ancient and essential stories of our faith. God brings God's people from slavery into freedom, and it's been told and retold over countless generations to help us make sense of oppression and exile and of journeys and of encounters with God. But right now, in this story, we are at the beginning. A new king comes to power in Egypt who didn't know Joseph. Some generations ago, it's not really clear how long, the people of Israel had come down to Egypt as climate refugees. Sound familiar? Joseph's brothers had gone to Egypt to buy food for their hungry families during a multi-year drought and famine. And when they got there, miraculously, their hated little brother, who they had sold into slavery, was now ruling Egypt. And he forgave them and gave them food and work and safety. Joseph had become a man with authority, and in that moment of vulnerability, the brothers trusted him. And they went back to Canaan, and they brought their whole entire family. Exodus says 70 people, including their very aged father Jacob, and they all came down to live in one area in Egypt. And for a while it was fine, and the extended family flourished, and they grew, and they became a tribe and a people, and they were a presence in the land. Egypt was already what we might consider ancient at this time. I looked it up on Wikipedia, and the civilization we understand as ancient Egypt lasted 3,000 years. By the time Moses and the pharaohs he served were ruling, there had been pharaohs and pyramids already for 1,000 years. But something upset this new king who didn't remember Joseph, and he didn't remember that these people were related to this person who had kept the country stable under a time of food shortages and inflation and instability. I'm thinking like FDR. And we don't know what happened, but maybe things were unstable, or maybe he needed a political scapegoat to unite the people behind him. And so he whips up the people against the Hebrews, and they pass draconian laws and force them into enslaved labor and order that all the baby boys be drowned in the Nile. The king ordered a genocide. For a while, the story does turn brighter. We have these shrewd midwives, Shipra and Puah. They show what the Jewish feminist theologian Francine Klagsbrunn says is the first documented instance of civil disobedience. Go team. They defy the king, and then Jochebed, Moses' mother, hides her baby boy, and Miriam, his sister, keeps an eye on his basket, and the Pharaoh's daughter, who's pushy and curious, she rescues and adopts this baby. We get this moment of defiance and joy. But the midwives' act does not bring down the Pharaoh. It didn't end the genocide or release the Hebrews from their enslavement. The suffering continues for decades more. Meanwhile, Moses grows up in the Pharaoh's court and follows their way, even as his people are laboring. They build all those, it says they built cities, Ramses and some other city to supply the work of the pharaohs. So the Hebrews are trapped in their suffering, and they can't really remember any other life. They'd forgotten their agency, and they'd forgotten their freedom. It seems in this moment that they have almost forgotten God. That moment in the story has resonance for me with our own time. I know people, or we see on the news, people who have fled disasters, like in Haiti or Venezuela, or earthquakes or drought. I met a family last year who had walked to Texas and Colorado all the way from Venezuela. I have friends who lost their homes in the fires in California. I've met refugees from El Salvador fleeing gang violence. I'm sure you all have people in your life or have connections or see the news. People work in unsafe conditions. Our economy is exploitive. Leaders make racist, populist threats, and they try to make us afraid of our neighbors. They tell us we should be afraid and drive those other people out. And meanwhile, the rest of us are just living in Egypt, tilling our fields and tending our flocks and shopping in the marketplace and taking a nice walk along the Sacramento and American rivers. Since the Exodus narrative is so central to our faith, we often read ourselves into the story as the children of Israel. That's the story, the way we hear the story at the Great Vigil. We imagine ourselves as oppressed and seeking freedom, and we are and can be. But if we hold our 21st century, urban, digital, globalized lives up against the story of Exodus, we must also recognize ourselves in the Egyptians. Others labor in the hot sun to feed us. Others work at construction sites and warehouses. Others mine the minerals that I use to talk to you all on the internet and stream. Leaders tell us to be afraid. All around us, people are not free. So where are we then when we listen with the Egyptians in this story? Where is the path to freedom for us and for everyone? Where do we find liberation and healing? Well, it won't surprise you. In the Bible or in the world, women show us the way. People sometimes think, and I thought this when I was studying Greek and Hebrew, where the most common word in both languages is, and the man said. But women are always at work towards justice alongside men, even if they don't get named. And they are working to subvert oppression and address injustice and care for the vulnerable. Even if they can't change the structures they live in, they still take action when they can. In this story, the people don't sit back and complain that the problem is big. They step forward and do something. We have these midwives, Shipra and Puah. My Old Testament professor told us that the phrase Hebrew midwives can also be translated the midwives to the Hebrews. It's possible that these were Egyptian women who refused Pharaoh's order. What does that tell us? And then we have Moses' mother, who followed the letter but not the spirit of the law. She did actually cast her baby boy into the Nile. She just tucked him neatly into a boat first. And then, of course, Miriam, who was with Moses his whole life, all the way to the promised land. She tells this bold lie to Pharaoh's mother, and it turns out that Pharaoh's daughter pays Jochebed to care for her own baby. Go, Jochebed and Miriam. But of course, the most interesting person here is Pharaoh's daughter. She's raised in these halls of power, and her lifestyle depended on the suffering of the Hebrews, but she was still listening and young enough to learn to use her power in a clever way. Her heart is still open, so she responds when she hears someone cry out, even though she's breaking her father's laws. She took pity on these people she met by the Nile, who were vulnerable to oppression and injustice. She didn't pretend she couldn't see what was happening. She says, "This must be one of the Hebrews' children." And she used her privilege as an Egyptian and as a ruler to reunite this family that had been torn apart. She made them a little oasis of freedom. She did what she could where she was. and she played an essential part in the story of God's salvation. It's hard to know where we are in our own stories right now, personally or in the world, in politics, here at St. Paul's. Some things are beginning, or they might be. Some things we're not sure if they're going to keep going. And sometimes I feel stuck in this messy middle, and I don't know what's coming or how to prepare. And in this kind of time, we have to pay attention to which authorities we turn to and which rules we follow. Do we remember that we are free and beloved? Do we hear the voice of God? Because we are also God's people, and we also need God's salvation. We are at once Hebrews and Egyptians, weary and waiting, oppressing and oppressed, anxious and hopeful, confined and running away. All of us are somewhere in the story of Exodus looking for courage and needing to hear the voice of God and to take steps towards freedom. Our psalm today reminds us right at the end, our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. That line gets repeated in the Psalms. There's another psalm, I don't know which one, maybe 121. He will not suffer our foot to be moved. He watches over us as we slumber and sleep. It will always be God who we should turn to for help, not politicians or economics or our bank accounts or our own efforts or even our own generosity and faithfulness towards one another. Only the voice of God can guide us when we are in a wilderness. Only God gives us the pillars of cloud and fire that show us the way to go. I learned after we had printed the bulletin last Sunday that it was the anniversary of St. Paul's founding, August 16th, 1849. This community hasn't been around as long as Egypt or pyramids, but it's definitely been longer than most churches in California. So where are we in our story? What is beginning? What might be ending? And what parts of life here is a messy middle where we need to figure out what's next? Always our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. God is with us. And Jesus promised that whenever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I will be in the midst of them, and there are definitely more than 2 or 3 people here. So God is near, and we can trust that God is with us in our story. And as we continue to place our trust in God, we will also find the courage to take action, like Shiphrah and Puah and Jochebed and Miriam, and especially Pharaoh's unnamed daughter. People who recognize the pain and injustice around us, injustice we suffer and injustice we are part of. People who look for a way to respond, for a path that moves towards caring and God's freedom and God's love. The path ahead of us might seem uncertain or the work really big. We might not know where we are in the story, but we know that we are God's people and we are called to do God's work. And it's not just my work, and it's not just your work. It's all of our work, and that work is ultimately God's work. As we pray and sing today, amid all of our challenges, may we follow the example of Pharaoh's daughter, who softened her heart and stiffened her courage and took action with compassion and imagination and love. Amen.